Like giant tombstones above Kuala Lumpur stand the ruins of 2 apartment blocks, gutted and empty. These are the Highland Towers. A third block once stood alongside. Today, there is a vacant, overgrown space reclaimed by the jungle. "17 years ago, that long-vanished block collapsed in the catastrophic blink of an eye.
I saw it coming down in slow motion, very slow motion, and then the whole building fell. After that, there was complete silence, deafening silence.
The collapse of Highland Towers killed 48 people. This is the story of that tragedy. In 1993, Highland Towers is tucked away in a green oasis on the east side of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia's capital, and offers its residents magnificent views of the city.
It was a lovely place to live. It was cooling, breezy, very quiet.
Basically, we had a vertical compound.
I had lived there for 14 years, and I had good friends among the residents.
There was a really nice atmosphere, and the kids could go to anybody's house, knock on the door and just see somebody. It really had quite a good community spirit feeling about the place.
Highland Towers comprises 3 identical 12-story blocks. Each block is 2 towers in one, joined together by a central service core, including lifts and stairs. A steep hillside rises immediately behind the 3 towers. This has been partly terraced to provide space for more development. The safety of the residents of Highland Towers depends on the structural integrity of this hill slope. December 1993. The northeast monsoon arrives on schedule. As usual, Kuala Lumpur is awash.
It was raining a lot.
Every day for almost 2 weeks.
Heavy rainfall is normal that time of the year, but this was exceptional.
In the early morning of December the 11th, there is a light drizzle. But the day soon begins to clear. It's a welcome reprieve. But out of sight, just beneath the steep slope behind the towers, something is happening that will bring tragedy and shatter lives. Teenager Sasha Bashir is attending a dance class on the other side of the city.
Just before I left the house in the morning, I looked back over my shoulder, and I remember thinking, just having this strange, feeling that, I wasn't really going to see it like this again.
It was a typical Saturday in Malaysia, and many residents had gone to work for the morning. Inside Block 1, a number of families went about their weekend chores. Just after lunch, their world changed forever.
There was this awful noise, and I didn't know what it was, but it was really horrible. Loud, deafening. There was probably a sense of some sort of a foreboding feeling.
On her way home, Dr. Hui stops to talk to a friend who lives on the first floor and is having her apartment renovated.
I also heard some sort of rumbling sound. And I asked her, are your workers grinding the floor?
On the 4th floor of the neighboring Block 2, Bruce Mitchell, an American on holiday, has just come back from Christmas shopping. He is enjoying a beer on his balcony. He has an excellent view of Block 1.
Suddenly, I heard a loud rumbling noise. I thought that someone was throwing cans down the garbage dispenser. then the noise just kept going on.
Bruce has the presence of mind to grab a camera. He could see the retaining wall behind Block 1 disintegrating.
I saw movement on the hill of what looked like something underneath the grass. It was rippling, and then everything was kind of pouring out of that big hole in the retaining wall.
Inside her third-floor apartment, Sasha Bashir's mother, Annette, realizes that something is terribly wrong.
The second daughter was at home, Sabrina. So then I called to her and just said, come. And she's a really obedient sort of person. And so she didn't sort of say why or anything, she just came. And we ran down the stairs like 2 and 3 steps at a time, like jumping down the stairs. My heart felt like it was pounding in my mouth.
On the ground floor, Dr. Hui makes a decision that saves her life.
Big stones were coming towards us from the back staircase. I sensed there was some danger. I said, we had better run out. Just like that.
On the 4th floor, Carlos Musa is in the shower. His wife Rosina senses extreme danger. She has a baby, Marisa.
My sister said to Lita, the maid, take Marisa out as soon as possible. As she walked down the staircase, the building walls were beginning to crack, and by the time she reached the ground level, chasms were building up in the ground, and she had to jump, and she fell about 3 times before she finally got to safety.
We ran for about 200 meters maybe. I looked back and I couldn't believe my eyes.
I could see the building starting to quiver. I remember saying to my daughter, we've made it this far, I don't want to get killed by a piece of flying concrete.
Bruce Mitchell is still snapping away from Block 2.
I was stunned because the building started to move. It was just gliding. And all of a sudden, there was a low snapping noise, and then the building started to topple.
The residents who had miraculously escaped now watched the final moments of Block 1.
As it hit the ground, this big cloud of dust suddenly just took over the place, took over everything, and nobody could see anything.
The echoes from the sound of the building falling, they went on for a few seconds, and then after that was just silence. Something that you see in the movies, I mean, not in real life.
Disbelief. How can this happen? This is Malaysia. We're not in an earthquake zone.
Zarif Effendi was playing in Block 2, but his siblings were in Block 1.
I was just going around like a crazy person trying to find my brother or sister, trying to ask people, have you seen my brother and sister? Have you seen my brother or sister?
It has taken just 5 minutes for Highland Towers Block 1 to collapse like a house of concrete cards. 12 floors of apartments lie smashed and broken. 50 family homes have been obliterated. An unknown number of people are trapped inside the mass of twisted wreckage. Kuala Lumpur's emergency services face the most daunting rescue operation in the city's history. December the 11th, 1993. In Kuala Lumpur's Ampang district, Highland Towers Block 1 collapses. An unknown number of residents are trapped in the wreckage. The nation's fire service, the bomber, is first to respond.
Lebih kurang pukul 1:30, terima panggilan kejadian bangunan runtuh Highland Tower. Kita orang pun terus menuju ke tapak Highland Tower yang tumbang. Bila tiba di sana, saya terkejutlah dan tergamamlah.
The firefighters confront a scene of unparalleled destruction. Thousands of tons of steel and reinforced concrete look as if they had been flattened by the swipe of a vengeful giant's hand. From the ruins comes a shrill symphony of car alarms. For the bomber team, the collapse of an entire apartment block is the biggest challenge they have ever faced.
When the first bomber guys came along, for like a few seconds, they just looked at the building and I guess they had no idea what to do. I mean, they've probably never seen this before.
The bomber team have good reason to proceed with care. The disaster site is potentially a death trap.
Saya dengan kawan-kawan saya rasa perlu membuat sesuatu untuk menyelamat mangsa. Jadi kita buat pencarian rambang di sekeliling bangunan. Tapi kita takut dia nak masuk bangunan tu sebab bangunan tu unstable.
The whole structure was still creaking and groaning. Shards of concrete were breaking off constantly, so you were showered from bits and pieces. Because the whole building was still in flux. I mean, it could have at any stage, to be quite honest, suddenly collapsed itself.
Ada bau kuat, bau petro dengan LPG, gas masak, dan bangunan tu pun masih bergerak lagi. Mana masih berbunyi, prap, 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 prap.
The worst danger that the rescuers face is a consequence of the way the two linked towers of Block 1 collapsed.
The front part of the building, as we knew it when it was in the air, had been crushed to less than a metre or maybe a metre and a half thick. The other part of the building stood up like a fishbone, and all the floors still erect, but when they should have been horizontal. Phenomenal.
These fishbones, the upended floors, are now vertical walls that threaten to collapse on top of the rescuers if they try to enter the structure. The hazardous state of Block 1 is just one anxiety for the rescue team. Looming over the site are the other two towers, and it's feared that they might come crashing down at any moment. Police officer Zaman Khan makes a decision to have them evacuated immediately.
We thought it is safer to evacuate everybody from the other two buildings.
Occupants of Highland Tower, Block B and Block C, please vacate the said blocks because it is considered unsafe now.
As the rescuers battle to come up with a strategy, distraught relatives begin to gather at the site. The sheer horror of what has taken place is overwhelming.
So a lot of the family members were there and total shock, total disbelief. Just how can this happen to me? Where are my loved ones?
Block 1 resident Dr. P.G. George returns to find his wife and two daughters are missing.
We saw Dr. George and he could hardly walk with people holding him. And in a way that's what really brought home what had happened.
Zarif Afandi, who has been searching desperately for his brother and sister, provides a single piece of good news. His siblings are safe.
They went out luckily, but the set went top of them. But my mate, dia balik luka.
The biggest relief, you're like, oh my God.
When So Chai Hock, Deputy Director of Malaysia's Fire Service, reaches the disaster site, he has no illusions about the challenge his men now face and the urgency of their task.
In my 30 years of operation, I have never seen such a huge collapse of a building.
The bomber team lacked the specialized equipment needed to deal with a building collapse on this scale. But So Chai Hock orders his men into action.
The fire service was ill-equipped for such a job. We do not have the specialized equipment to cater for such a disaster. But we cannot stand here saying to do nothing. We gave everything. We went in and we tried to take the people out.
So I went up together with some firemen using their ladder. And then we were looking around. I told the man, careful, but look around just in case there are survivors.
Almost at once, firefighter Mahendran Muniandi hears the sound that they all desperately hope to hear. A human cry for help.
Jadi bila naik, saya pergi ke dalam, saya jerit. Halo, halo kan? Kalau ada siapa-siapa kan? Dan saya dengar bunyi.
Mahendran finally tracks down the sound to the remains of the 6th floor.
Bila kita sampai ke suara itu, kita nampak ada satu seorang mangsa dah ditimbus dengan dinding menutupi separuh badan dia lah. Kita dapati nak mengangkat tembok itu satu masalah. Dia pun tolak.
The trapped woman is a Japanese national called Shizui Nakajima. She has been terribly injured.
Badan dia kebiru-biruan. Lepas tu kita tunggu bantuan sampai ke atas stretcher. Kita tunggu di bawah lebih kurang setengah jam lah.
As the rescuers struggle to free the stricken Shizui, they hear a second cry, but it's hard to locate where the sound is coming from.
We heard tolong like that, but we were looking around, it's all rubble and all that.
Then, one of the rescue teams spots a stick being poked through the rubble. As they begin digging, a heart-rending sight confronts the rescuers.
I was surprised there was this baby and the mother. So we took the baby out, and I was so surprised that there was no injuries on the baby.
The baby, Nur Hamida, just 16 months old, is soon safe in the hands of her rescuers, and apparently unfazed by her astonishing escape. Meanwhile, the bombermen have at last freed the injured Japanese woman Shizui. A crane has reached the site and she is delicately lifted to safety. Minutes later, the mother of the rescued baby is at last winched to freedom. She is an Indonesian maid called Umi Rashida, who had been trapped inside an apartment when the building collapsed. Rescue teams and waiting relatives, the deliverance of these 3 survivors is electrifying.
We were quite happy at that time, thinking that the rest could be found.
But the rescuers now face a problem. No one can account for how many people were in Block 1 when it collapsed.
Obviously the numbers, it was a total unknown. It could have been anything from 150 down to 0. Obviously people were going to be there because it was still a lunchtime on a Saturday. So, but we didn't know how many. We just really didn't initially.
And an even more urgent question is, are any still alive? It's day 1 of the Highland Towers rescue. Hordes of television crews and journalists have staked out the site, and the news of the catastrophe is fast rippling out across Kuala Lumpur. People who have relatives and friends in Highland Towers are horrified to find out that they may have loved ones trapped in the wreckage.
So we was watching the Hindi movie, then got breaking news. They say the condominium collapsed. My legs start shaking and all that, you know.
Rahat's daughter Anna, her British son-in-law Robin, and her grandson were all in Block 1 at the time it collapsed.
In front of the TV waiting, listening news, because a Japanese lady was safe and one Indonesian lady and her daughter was safe. So we was hoping maybe she also was safe.
Just hoping and praying that she survived this, I mean, it could be a miracle somewhere that she could be alive.
For those watching and waiting, this stirring news of 3 people rescued brings a surge of hope. Dr. Rizwan Bakar is waiting to hear about his sister Rosina and her husband Carlos Musa.
My feeling at that time, of course, was that of hope. Hope that the people who were in the building at that point in time were somehow still alive.
Dr. Rizwan volunteers as a rescuer, and he joins the many other civilians who offer to help the bombermen. Another volunteer, Mike Rickard, a safety engineer, is shocked by what he finds.
So just try and get hold of a tractor.
I just went up and said, can I help in some way? And there didn't seem to be any coordinated activities. Nobody seemed to be taking charge. It's what I call fighting fires. 1 minute they're saying, oh, there's some problem here, everybody rushes there, there's a problem over there, everybody rushes there. It was obviously disorganized, totally and absolutely disorganized.
Hours after the collapse, much still needs improvising. The rescue teams depend heavily on the generosity of local individuals and companies who donate vital equipment.
They responded very generously, especially the business community. They send in their heavy trucks together with the operators.
We have to open our mouth for help, it'll come.
Because the ruins of Block 1 remain so unstable, there is one simple piece of kit that is urgently needed on site.
We need to have acrojacks, which are these basically a form of scaffolding which allows separation of concrete structures.
With hundreds of acrojacks in place, the teams can enter deeper into the ruins without fear of further collapse.
We went in between those collapsed walls, and carefully we were removing stones and all this, trying to get access into the building.
To remove the rubble, initially there was only one way, and that was picking rocks up and passing down the line. And we didn't have the luxury of time. We were just going in and searching.
In the evening of the first day, Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir arrives at the disaster site. Highland Towers is now an international news story, and Dr. Mahathir calls for help from around the world. The Prime Minister also wants answers. How many people are still trapped inside the building, and why did it collapse? As it happens, an engineer from the Public Works Department has already arrived on site to find answers.
My first question that came to my mind was, how did a building which stood over the last 10, 12 years could have failed now?
The rescue operation will destroy vital clues, so Dr. Azbi must work fast.
We need to have some kind of photographic evidence, because in the search and rescue, when you try to move things from the rubble, you probably destroy some evidence.
Dr. Azbi makes an alarming discovery. He can hear water flowing down the slope towards the rescue site, which he fears might trigger another deadly landslide. So he takes immediate steps to stem the flow.
We had to do all that was required of the public works to ensure the safety at that time of the search and rescue, to prevent further movement of the slope behind the building.
It's just after midnight, the start of day 2 of the rescue. The rescuers receive dispiriting news. Shizui Nakajima, the Japanese woman rescued the day before, has died from her injuries in hospital. The news is a bitter blow. A mass of personal belongings has been removed from the ruins of Block 1. Painful reminders of lost homes. It's believed that there are 36 people trapped inside the ruins, but there is still uncertainty about these numbers. By days 2 and 3, international rescue teams are responding to Malaysia's call for help.
We have no experience for a disaster of this magnitude, you know.
Experts fly in from Singapore, France, and Japan. These highly experienced teams bring to the disaster site a battery of high-tech search and rescue equipment. The reinforced teams focus their attention on the service area stairwell that once linked the 2 towers of Block 1. This is where residents trying to escape should have fled.
People would have, as soon as the building started to move and shudder, would have tried to escape. And obviously their form of escape would be the stairs. They would be somewhere on that staircase.
rescuers will tunnel towards the service block area from opposite sides. The international teams use search cameras, an extension of the human eye, to peer into voids inside the collapsed structure. The French deploy their tracker dogs, able to detect any human trace. It's hoped that these new strategies will speed up the rescue of any survivors.
Time is always the factor that all rescuers must take into consideration. You fight against time.
We recognize that a human being can only survive for so long. Dehydration is the worst thing to fear. Of course, time is critical.
As the rescuers redouble their efforts, the nagging anxiety that the other two blocks might suddenly fail deepens. Engineers have set up monitoring equipment to check for any sign of movement. On day 3, an alarm is raised from Block 2, sending everyone scurrying for shelter.
It's collapsing, and everybody just ran.
Can you imagine the rescuers all have to evacuate and quickly make their exit?
But Block 2 remains resolutely vertical, and So Chai Hock confronts the man who sounded the alarm.
Oh, why have you hit the alarm? And he pointed out to the building. And actually the clouds were moving. And he thought that the building was coming down. It was an optic illusion. It could be stress. So immediately I have him replaced. And I said, look, you can't have such thing going on.
On the rescue site, work resumes. The French team use sensitive listening devices to try and find sounds of life deep inside the collapsed tower.
Listening for very specific sound patterns. And the way they do it is by inducing a series of knocks which have a normal response. Now, if I gave the normal reaction would be, and that's the sort of pattern that they would use.
On the evening of the 3rd day at 7:30, there's a sudden buzz of excitement. A member of the French team hears an answering pattern of knocks.
The whole operation ceased to allow time to hear it clearly.
The knocking sound is faint and intermittent, but Mike Rickard has never doubted what he heard.
It was a very distinct reply, and I listened to it, and that reply was repeated and repeated. It sort of made the hairs at the back of my neck stand up. I mean, I could hear somebody somewhere in the vicinity was replying to this induced knock.
The sound galvanizes the rescuers and raises hope among the waiting relatives.
They heard knockings and I sort of believed that. Because it is possible for somebody to actually be knocking and respond to what the people are doing on top. That gave me hope.
Now all of Malaysia prays that the rescuers have at last found another survivor of Highland Towers. 5 days after the catastrophic collapse of Highland Towers Block 1, the rescue operation continues day and night. So far, just 3 of the residents who were inside at the time the tower collapsed have been found alive. One of them, Shizui Nakajima, has died from her injuries in hospital. But now, the French rescue team has detected the sound of knocking from somewhere deep inside the rubble and have been using the knocks for over a day to try to locate one or more survivors. The rescuers know that this fragile sound is the last chance to find anyone alive.
It came from within the structure, that's all I could say. Where within the structure, don't know, because the way that sound travels through concrete is weird and wonderful. You can't say it's over there and how far over there. You just don't know.
We do not give up so easily. We will continue. Even we can save one more life, it's worth the effort or all of us there. That was the bottom line which we told our people. Even one more line, I said.
For 2 more days, the rescuers listened to the fading knocks, frantically trying to locate the source of the sound. But at the beginning of day 7, there is a heart-stopping silence. The knocking stops and is never heard again. That silence is the end of hope.
Hope is the last thing you lose, but you know, it is very, very painful when you have to face that.
My hope died at day 7.
As that last knock faded, the wreckage of Highland Tower's Block 1 becomes, instead of a trap, a tomb. Reluctantly, a decision is made to end rescue efforts and begin a search for the dead.
The only way we knew we were going to quickly access any bodies was to go in with heavy machinery.
As the machines begin smashing up the rubble, the emotional impact on the waiting relatives, who now realize that no one can still be alive, is shattering.
Big equipment come in and started to take stuff away. And that, emotionally to the families, that was devastating.
Obviously we can't and don't want to leave anybody unaccounted for.
In this last phase of the operation, the search teams believe that there might be more than 50 victims inside the remains of Highland Towers. A terrible odor begins to permeate the site, the unmistakable smell of death.
You know, and with that smell, that death is there. And to the families, is it my son, is it my daughter, is it my mother or father?
Nisa Barno prepares for the worst. Her sister, baby nephew and brother-in-law were all in Block 1.
We were just waiting to hopefully get her body out and give her a proper burial, all of them, and all 3 of them. It reached a stage where we were waiting just for that. We managed to accept she may not be alive.
We started basically at the base of the building, what we call level 1, because that was the way it was leaning. And we would just progressively work floor by floor, demolishing, removing, demolishing, removing. And that's why, when it didn't take us long at that stage, before we came across the first of the bodies at ground floor.
It was just after sundown on day 8.
As soon as we came across anything recognizable as a body, we would then stop, go back to basically utilizing hand tools and removing physically by hand the rubble around the bodies to allow us access to bring them out as intact as possible.
I remember watching the bodies being brought out by the workers, and they were all in various states of decomposition. I remember seeing a lady clutching the Holy Quran. I remember seeing a woman clutching a child with both arms.
It's natural to protect your loved ones, and that last minute of
The remains of Dr. Rizwan's sister Rosina and her husband Carlos are found the next day.
They found them in the staircase, somewhere between the third and second floor together in an embrace.
All the remains are taken to the Kuala Lumpur mortuary. By the end of the recovery operation, the disaster team has found the remains of 47 residents of Highland Towers, bringing the final death toll to 48, including the Japanese woman Shizue Nakajima, who died in hospital. These numbers have fluctuated throughout the 12 days of the rescue, but 48 is now regarded as the official tally of victims. The families who have suffered such a devastating and unexpected loss now face another traumatizing task.
I felt that the rest of the family would be better off if they remembered Rosie and Carlos for what they were. And so I went on my own to do the body identification.
But every single individual must be identified, recorded, and mourned. Every clue to their identity takes on vital significance. Wedding rings, ID cards, dental records. The most poignant, heartbreaking remnants of a person and a life cut short.
We recognize Anna through her jewelry and clothes. And Robin, he's an exceptional Caucasian guy. He's really tall, and he was the only one that was found 6'3", 6'4", you know.
Then the funerals.
Definitely very difficult for a parent, especially in our Asian tradition. The child sends the parent to the hills to be buried. The parent do not send the child to be buried.
Horrible, horrible week. Just unbelievably awful. And the only way I think you sort of coped is by having family and friends around you. I think that would be about the worst week of my life. Ever.
I was going to funeral after funeral after funeral that whole week. One of them was my very first ballet teacher, and I remember feeling terrible at her funeral because I saw her son and daughter, and I couldn't even speak to them because I didn't know what to say. I mean, when you lose a family member, nothing you say is going to make them feel better.
Nisa Barno lost 3 members of her family, Anna, Robin, and Adam. As she struggles to come to terms with her loss, she begins to ask questions. Lots of questions.
I want an answer, you know. I want to know how did this happen? How can this happen? How does a building literally topples down? There was stories going around that the dragon beneath started to move. Yeah, right. We wanted answers, and we wanted to hold somebody accountable for this. They took away people that we loved.
Many other relatives of the dead, as well as survivors, want answers too. Why had Highland Towers Block 1 collapsed? And who was at fault? December the 11th, 1993. In Kuala Lumpur, Highland Towers Block 1 collapses, killing 48 people. Now, all Malaysia wants to know why the disaster happened and who is responsible. The government immediately launches an inquiry to find out. The council calls scores of witnesses and excavates the foundations of the collapsed tower. Although the investigators find evidence that the construction engineers cut corners, this alone does not explain the way the tower collapsed.
If you had some structural default in a building, you would expect the building to collapse vertically rather than toppling forward. There must be an external force that came into play.
Suspicion focuses on the steep hillside behind Highland Towers. Was this external force generated here? Mike Rickard, who took part in the rescue operation, suspects that this slope played a critical part in the disaster. He begins his own investigation of the suspect area and takes photographs.
must have been 20, 24 different retaining walls as you go up the hill. Some very deep, some relatively shallow, some short, some long.
It is clear to Mike that these walls had been poorly constructed, and engineer Dr. Asbi agrees.
The engineering design behind the rubber wall was really questionable.
Just prior to the fall of Block 1, eyewitness Bruce Mitchell clearly saw these retaining walls disintegrating. But why had the walls collapsed, and how was this linked to the catastrophic failure of the tower? The answer is all about water. Above Highland Towers is a small stream that has been diverted into a system of drains and pipes. In the early 1990s, a new development in Bukit Antara Bangsa begins on the other side of the ridge. Vast areas of land are cleared and deforested, and water runoff is diverted into the same system of drains and pipes above Highland Towers. These drains and pipes soon become stressed by the increased flow of water and silt.
Very quickly the pipe was blocked. So the pipe was overflowing and burst in a number of places. And unfortunately, we were getting water feeding into the hillside, right across the back of what we know as Highland Towers.
This relentless soaking is worst behind Block 1. Then, in December 1993, the annual monsoon dumps yet more water on the already heavily saturated slope. On Saturday the 11th, the water pressure behind the slope reaches a critical threshold. Directly behind Block 1, a huge volume of wet mud bursts forwards and downwards, smashing through the retaining walls. Seconds later, 100,000 cubic meters of mud, approximately the weight of 200 747 jumbo jets, rams into the foundations of Block 1. To begin with, the landslide shoves the entire mass of the building forwards. But this lateral sideways pressure is so powerful that the foundations at the front snap, and Block 1 crashes down.
You try and play with nature and it'll bite back. You've taken away the ability to absorb the water up on the hillside. But my water's still got to go somewhere. And it went into the earth, and the earth said, I can only take so much water. And after which I've got to move. And so it moved. And it took Highland Towers with it. So yes, don't mess with nature.
But who had messed with nature? Who was to blame for the disaster? In 1994, the residents of Highland Towers launched legal actions against developers, builders, and the local council. It takes years of bitter legal argument, but the residents eventually win their case more than a decade later. They receive some compensation. But the local council appeals and wins. For the residents, the court's decision is a travesty of justice.
As an individual, I'm responsible for the mistakes I make. Therefore, why should not a corporation or a local authority also be held liable if they make mistakes? But in this particular case, the law works in their favor.
No one should be immune to one's wrongdoings, right? There must be some kind of liability if it's really truly their fault. Otherwise, complacency sets in. What about the future development? If local authority is immune to this, they would not want to try hard enough trying to actually enforce certain things that is within their power to ensure that this thing does not recur.
In the aftermath of Highland Towers, the Malaysian government makes a number of important reforms. They focus on the way authorities respond to disasters to ensure that there will be no confusion of responsibility.
Definitely we have learned, but we must continue to learn. Out from this, the government realized and came in with Arahan 20, or what we call the 20 directive under the Prime Minister Department, where the instrument is laid out of who, where, how is responsible when there is a disaster on land.
Malaysia now has its own disaster response team, the Special Malaysia Disaster Assistance and Rescue Team, or the SMART team.
The SMART team is formulated and formed in line similar to a DART team or the Japanese team, whereby they combine the fire service, the police and others and combine them together to form a strike team, an international strike team.
Today, nearly 20 years after the Highland Towers disaster, local authorities must rigorously scrutinize planning applications. And there's now a special unit that monitors the safety of slopes.
Kita belajar dari Highland Tower bahawa lereng-lereng bukit adalah satu kawasan yang agak sensitif dan jika ia tidak dipantau, ia akan membahayakan.
Kuala Lumpur is vibrant and ever-expanding. New developments need space and often find it on the hills that surround the city. This means that lessons learned after the Highland Towers disaster must never be forgotten.
Those who do not read history will live through it again. And I think we'll live through it again if we forget.
I don't want anyone else to go through what me and my family or any of my neighbors went through that day.
To me, there still needs a lot of work to be done to make sure there's no more Highland Towers.
For the survivors and those who lost family members and friends, nothing will ever make up for the lives lost that day in December.
I miss my sister a lot. I don't have a sister. She was the only one. And she had a baby and so did I. Same year. There was only a 2-month difference between our boys. I just miss that what could have been.